Welcome to the Supreme Court Podcast.
All opinions expressed in this podcast do not reflect the views of the Supreme Court. For clarity, the text of the decision prevails.
Have you ever had relatives asking you what's the quickest way to secure an annulment or a decree of nullity from the courts? Or perhaps how much the entire package costs? And sometimes you're forced to offer a disclaimer, it's not that easy. And so they look for a quick fix. Hi, I'm Attorney Mike Navalio, Supreme Court Chief Communications Officer. It's the 4th of October 2024, and today we talk about a case involving a lawyer who promised to secure a decree of nullity within 6 months. But there's a twist, which we will soon find out. The case is Melody H. Santos versus attorney Emilio Peña Jr., an en banc decision by the Supreme Court decided on February 6, 2024. And joining us to talk about this case is Supreme Court spokesperson, Attorney Camille Ting. Hi, Attorney Camille. Welcome back to the Supreme Court Podcast.
Hi, Attorney Mike. It's great to be back here.
Right. So, Attorney Camille, we've given our listeners a little glimpse of the case, but what really happened here? Why did the complainant, Melody Santos, file an administrative case against Attorney Emilio Peña Jr.?
So Melody filed an administrative complaint against Attorney Peña because he had secured an inauthentic or fake judgment for the nullity of her marriage. So Melody asked Attorney Peña for help to have her marriage annulled. So Peña and a court employee claimed that they could secure a judgment of nullity within 6 months. So she paid them 280,000 pesos and received the decree of nullity and even a certificate of finality of the judgment.
How did the complainant find out that the court documents that you mentioned, judgment as well as the certificate of finality, were in fact inauthentic?
Melody found out the judgment was fake when she applied for her K-1 or fiancé visa in the U.S. Embassy in Manila. She was told during her interview that the annulment papers she presented were inauthentic.
Were there any indications based on the documents that these were actually fake?
Well, Melody filed a petition in 2013, but the judgment and certificate of finality were dated 2010, signed by Judge Kader P. Indar of the Regional Trial Court, Cotabato City.
And what do we know about this judge who supposedly rendered the judgment?
So Judge Indar was actually dismissed from the service and disbarred in 2012 for issuing a large number of annulment orders that did not go through the proper procedure. He made it appear that the cases underwent trial when the records of the courts show that there were no proceedings at all.
So this judge was dismissed and disbarred in 2012. She filed 2013. The documents were dated 2010. When did she receive these documents?
She received these documents in 2014, 2 years after Judge Indar was actually dismissed and disbarred.
Okay. So how was the complainant prejudiced by the fake documents? And was she able to get her money back?
Well, because of the fake documents, Melody's application for a US visa was denied. Apart from spending 280,000, she had to hire another lawyer to file another petition to nullify her marriage. However, she was able to get 260,000 back from Attorney Peña.
And what did Attorney Peña say about these allegations against him?
Well, Attorney Peña denied the allegations against him. He claimed that he told Melody that a quick annulment was not possible in South Cotabato, and that he had only referred her to a court employee who could help her. It was only a year after, when Melody asked to meet him, that he found out that the National Statistics Office, now the Philippines Statistics Authority, did not honor the court judgment.
Okay, so what did she do? She filed a complaint?
Yes, she filed a complaint which was referred by the Supreme Court to the Integrated Bar of the Philippines.
Mm-hmm. And what did the IBP say? What were the recommendations of the IBP?
So the IBP Commission on Bar Discipline recommended that Attorney Peña be suspended from the practice of law for 2 years, but the IBP Board of Governors modified the penalty to disbarment.
Do we know why the IBP Board of Governors increased the penalty?
Well, the IBP board said that lawyers are only supposed to deal with real and valid documents. Dealing with fake ones is crude forgery, which is an attack on the integrity of court processes.
Mm-hmm. And when the case reached the Supreme Court, did the Supreme Court adopt the recommendations of the IBP Board of Governors?
Yes, it did. So it held that Attorney Peña violated a number of canons of the Code of Professional Responsibility and Accountability, or the CPRA. In particular, he had violated Canon 2 on propriety, particularly Section 1, which is not to engage in unlawful, dishonest, immoral, or deceitful conduct. Section 2, respect the law and the courts, and not to engage in conduct that adversely reflects on one's fitness to practice law, nor behave in a scandalous manner. Section 5, to observe principles of fairness and obedience to the law. And Section 8, which is a prohibition against misleading the court. Then, under Canon 3 on fidelity, he had violated Section 2, which is a mandate to obey the laws, promote respect for laws, and the legal process. So, falsification of court documents has been pronounced by the court as an offense amounting to unlawful, dishonest, immoral, and deceitful conduct. In fact, in 3 cases, lawyers were disbarred for falsifying documents.
Did the Supreme Court find enough evidence to support the findings that there were violations of specific sections of certain canons in the Code of Professional Responsibility and Accountability?
Yes, the Supreme Court found that there was substantial evidence to prove that Attorney Peña had violated these canons.
And just for the benefit of our listeners, Attorney Camille, when we talk about substantial evidence, what do we mean by substantial evidence?
So substantial evidence is the amount of evidence a reasonable mind would accept as adequate to support a conclusion, even if other minds equally reasonable might conceivably opine otherwise.
Mm-hmm. And one interesting detail in this case, Attorney Camille, is that when it was filed, the legal basis were actually violations of the lawyer's oath and the Code of Professional Responsibility. But when it was decided, the code was amended and it became the Code of Professional Responsibility and Accountability. So it means that when it was committed, it was a different code that was governing it.
Mm-hmm.
But when the case was finally decided, another code was already in effect. Why was the CPRA applied in this particular case?
Well, that's because the CPRA has a transitory provision that states that it should apply to both pending and future cases. So this case was pending when the CPRA took in effect.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, that's why the CPRA was applied.
And what's the striking difference between the CPR and the CPRA?
So the CPRA provides that falsification of documents is a serious offense and provides for specific penalties for it, ranging from a fine of more than 100,000 pesos to disbarment, unlike in the old Code of Professional Responsibility, which had none.
Mm-hmm. And so what lessons can we learn from this case, Attorney Camille, particularly for the lawyers who are engaging in these types of practices, promising something that they could supposedly obtain from the court, certain rulings, when in fact, all they can come up with is a falsified document?
So let me quote from the case itself. By participating in the falsification of court documents, Attorney Peña made a mockery of the judicial system. Instead of being an advocate for justice, he became a perpetrator of injustice. His reprehensible acts show he should not remain in the roles of the legal profession.
Something the lawyers listening, and maybe law students even, should learn from. And to the public, in case you're dealing with lawyers, any practical reminder to them?
So the public should always be on the lookout and exercise due diligence. They should always check the lawyers they are dealing with, the courts, the judges, as well as the documents that they are issuing or receiving.
All right. Thank you again, Attorney Camille, for joining us today. And if you wish to read the full text of the court's decision, you can go to the Supreme Court website and e-library. Just search for Melody H. Santos versus Attorney Emilio S. Peña Jr., AC number 12353. And here's Tiff Atendido Beltran, Supreme Court Information Officer, for this week's Roundup.
At the Supreme Court this week. The Supreme Court denied Attorney Harry Roque Jr.'s petition for the issuance of a writ of amparo against the House of Representatives Quad Committee. The court clarified that the scope of a writ of amparo is limited to extralegal killings and enforced disappearances, or such threats which are not present in this case. The court directed the Quad Committee to comment on Roque's petition for prohibition within 10 days from receipt of the court's resolution. In another resolution, the court issued a temporary restraining order against the implementation of Section 11 of COMELEC Resolution No. 11045, which allows public appointive officials to continue holding office even after being nominated as a party list representative. The court said that all parties are required to observe the status quo that public appointive officials are deemed resigned upon filing the certificate of candidacy. COMELEC is required to comment on the petition within a non extendable period of 10 days from notice. The Supreme Court and the Department of Environment and Natural Resources formally signed the deed of conveyance, transferring 2 hectares of land from the national government to the judiciary on October 2, 2024. The conveyed property will be utilized for the proposed judiciary compound in Mindanao. The Supreme Court upheld the prosecution's finding of probable cause and reinstated the arrest warrant and whole departure order against Dalia Guerrero Pastor as co-conspirator in the killing of her husband, racer Ferdinand Enzo Pastor. The Supreme Court held that a finding of probable cause needs only evidence showing that more likely than not, a crime has been committed by the suspects. It does not require evidence of guilt beyond reasonable doubt. The court found sufficient evidence that identifies Dalia as a co-conspirator in Enzo's killing, based on testimonies of their house help, the gunman, and the gun for hire initially tapped for the killing but who declined. The Supreme Court sought input, suggestions, and feedback from judges and court employees from first and second level courts in Zamboanga City and the nearby provinces and cities at the regional consultations for the proposed amendments to the Rules of Criminal Procedure on October 3 and the proposed amendments to the Rules of Civil Procedure on October 4. The regional consultations aim to engage various stakeholders, including judges, legal practitioners, and the academe, in discussing proposed amendments to the Rules of Civil and Criminal Procedure. In another decision, the Supreme Court ruled that it is the regional trial court that has jurisdiction over wills proved as valid in proceedings abroad. It clarified that for probate proceedings, the jurisdiction of the court is based on the value of the estate. If 2 million pesos and below, the first level courts have jurisdiction. If over 2 million pesos, the RTC has jurisdiction. For reprobate proceedings, a special proceeding to establish the validity of a will proved in a foreign country, it is the RTC that has jurisdiction regardless of the value.
And that's your Supreme Court this week. I am Tiffany Dobletran, Supreme Court Information Officer.
And that's our podcast this week. Join us again next time for a detailed discussion of select cases decided by the Supreme Court. I'm Attorney Mike Navalio, your Supreme Court Chief Communications Officer. You can catch this podcast on the Supreme Court Public Information Office's accounts on X, Facebook, Instagram, Threads, and YouTube. You can also catch previous editions on our website. Catch us on Spotify soon. This podcast episode was produced by the Supreme Court Public Information Office with Attorney Jen Tuazon Irania as researcher, Don Ryan Balza, Brian Austria, Victor Laranio, and Jerome Batumalake as sound editors, and Tyke Flores as web editor.